are now threatening the foundation of religious liberty by criminalizing Christianity and demanding that we abandon biblical principles of natural marriage.
Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee lamenting the decline of traditional values and what he calls criminalizing Christianity. Welcome back to Newsmax Prime. Now, if you haven't heard these numbers, they're worth repeating. According to the Pew Research Center, only 71% of Americans now consider themselves Christian, which is an 8% drop over 7 years. Meanwhile, the number of religiously unaffiliated people has risen by 6%. Against that backdrop, let's bring in our panel. We're pleased to be rejoined by Dr. Richard Land, president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary. He is Skyping in from Charlotte, and he is flanked on either side. First, from Newsmax Washington, Stephen Cobb, the former general counsel for the Democratic Party of Virginia, and from out in Orange County, California, political commentator and founder of ReaganBaby.com, Megan Barth. To you all, our thanks and welcome to Newsmax Prime. Now, Megan, you're preparing to leave California for Nevada, as I understand it. As you look at California in your rearview mirror, has it been the state with the greatest rise in a secular sentiment?
I would say so, since we've been ruled by progressives for quite some time, and the motivation and the methodology behind progressivism is to remove the family and religion from the culture in order for the government to be the know-all and be-all of the state and the people. So the people look towards the state for comfort and security rather than to God or their religion or their family for such things.
Let's go to Stephen there in Virginia. Now, Stephen, Democrats in the Old Dominion I thought of as more tradition-minded, but what is happening there in the Commonwealth? Do you see that decline in faith and in church going?
You know, I don't, and I don't think there's a solid foundation for Megan's comments here. You know, and this strikes on a personal note for me. Both of my parents are pastors. My grandfather was a pastor. His father was a pastor. So this is something that, you know, really, again, comes home for me. I don't think that you can draw any lines between this is a conservative issue or a progressive issue, whether or not people are identifying themselves as Christians.
What role does the popular media play in this decline in Christianity?
Well, I think the popular culture, of which the popular media is part, plays a big role. MTV and everything associated with popular culture has had a tremendous influence on millennials, and millennials are the group that is growing fastest among the unaffiliated. And I do think it's interesting to note that two of the most conservative religious groups are the two that have declined the least in relative numbers to the population, and actually have increased.
Let me call back in Stephen Cobb, because Stephen, you say both your parents are pastors. Do they sense a change?
I think even they would acknowledge that reaching today's young people and engaging them in the church is a continuing challenge, and that there's a lot of issues that go into that, and trying to find the best medium or manner in which to teach, communicate, and otherwise build upon that faith and increase those church-going membershies. But I'm not sure that I would define it as a rise in secularism. I think the interesting thing would be to talk about, the changes in the way that the church is reaching out to young people and spreading their message.
Well, let me ask, because Richard mentioned the popular culture, Megan, you're not geographically too far from Hollywood. Do you believe that Hollywood has played a major role in these changing mores and this changing outlook on faith?
Yeah, I think there's many parts to the changes in faith, and one comes from leadership and one comes from popular culture, and whether you find that leadership in the home, which we now have, more broken families, whether you find that leadership in the administration, who's very progressive and hasn't protected Christianity, although he claims to be a Christian, or if you find that in pop culture or the news, the media. When the media creates the headlines and is referring to Christians as a hate group, well, there's no real young kid who wants to be part of a hate group. Christianity is based out of love and not hate. And so when you have messages that are being advertised or distributed or as headlines to youth, that is going to influence where they go and what they believe.
Richard, final 30 seconds
and
to
I think
you.
that's a good point to jump in there, JD. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, very quickly, go ahead, Stephen.
One of the things that you talk about is using religion and Christianity as a way to bring people together and not divide them apart. And I think you can look at the early 2000s and see the way that religion, particularly Christianity, was used as a wedge issue, particularly through the South, and people would campaign on things
and
of
yet you take
guns,
a look
gods,
post
and gays.
And yet you look post 9/11, and people came together, and many of them filled churches and other fellowships of faith across the spiritual spectrum. Yes, Richard, last word to you, sir. Go ahead.
A Pew poll that was done in September of last year said that 49% of Americans want people of faith to express their views about social and moral issues in the political spectrum, up from 43% 4 years before. And they also, 76% feel that religion is in decline in America, and they want Christians to be more engaged and more involved. And I think there's no question that America is becoming less religious, and that is a symptom. All of these things that we're talking about are symptoms of a decline in spiritual faith in the United States, and the Christian faith needs to step forward and unambiguously speak the truth in love.
And one thing is for certain, all three of you have been engaged in a great conversation. We thank you all for your thoughts on this. Stephen Cobb, Dr. Richard Land, and Megan Barth, our thanks. And Newsmax Prime continues right after this.